60 Minutes Rewind.
Is it 30,000, 40,000, or 100,000? No one knows for sure, but lawyers, marriage counselors, and private detectives agree. The number of women who are leaving husband, home, and children is dramatically on the rise. By now, of course, divorce is old hat. 1 out of 3 American marriages ends that way. But what is new is the number of women frustrated by a life they call barren and emboldened by the women's liberation movement who are just walking away from their marriages. Who is the runaway wife, the dropout wife?
Meet Wanda Adams of Seattle, Washington. Back in the 50s, she was a top student at Washington State, the May Queen, a finalist for Sweetheart of Sigma Chi. She married her college sweetheart 3 days after her 21st birthday, and they stayed married for 14 years. Here's Don Adams, big man on campus at Washington State in the 50s, outstanding senior of the class of 1959, president of the Interfraternity Council. Now he's an executive with the Boeing Company. 2 years ago, Wanda took off, walked out, leaving behind her husband, a comfortable home, and 3 handsome kids. Pat and Christopher, who were then 6 and 7, Susan, who was 10. Wanda had grown restless. She returned to work, got caught up in the radical scene at the University of Washington, and found herself alienated from Don and the kids. Finally, as we said, 2 years ago, she just up and walked out. At first, leaving all 3 children with Don, then deciding to take her daughter Susan, now 12, with her across town to the counterculture neighborhood of Seattle, where, now divorced and accepting neither alimony nor child support, she lives in a dilapidated old Victorian house that she's trying to turn into a women's center.
What did you expect out of marriage?
Well, I think I expected more or less the traditional thing, American dream, so to speak. That, well, really, all I ever wanted to do was to get married and have babies. My mother says the same thing about me. And I just had this sort of vision of myself being happy and wafting through the house in a pink peignoir with, you know, the baby in my arms. But I really believed that I would be happy doing that.
It didn't work out that way. Why?
It's too difficult, living in the kind of isolation that families have now, being tied to the home and to children, talking to 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds, and rarely seeing another adult, unless it's a neighborhood woman for coffee. And I had been through college, and I had taught for a couple years, and I missed that. I missed the contacts that I had. You may have had outside interests, but you give up on many. Symbolically, you give up on your name in most cases. And I think that's the beginning of the loss of identity.
We got married in the late, in 1957, and that was, the marriage was another step in what was to be a relatively routine life. You go to high school and you graduate, you go to college, you graduate, you get married and you find a job, and then you start to grow within your job and you make more money and you buy a bigger house.
Anything wrong with it?
Well, just looking at it right now, it looks sort of a bleak existence.
You mean you like what's happened to you?
I like what's happened to me since. I do.
Really?
I feel very good. I think it's offered challenges which people don't normally face.
Were you hurt, Don?
I think I was hurt because traditionally you feel that you can, or at least I always have felt that I could work through all my problems. And I think the major thing that bothered me was acceptance.
Did it make you feel less than a man?
No, I never felt that way. I never really have felt inadequate as a result of what happened. I have too much pride in myself, I think, and that's why I was never really afraid that I would have a problem with taking care of the children.
And so when she came to you and said, look, I've had it and I'm going to walk.
That's not essentially the way it went, but I got the picture. She walked. And,
Despite the real bitterness and anger there surely must have been, today Don and Wanda have only kind words about each other, though they both rule out any chance of reconciliation.
Don was the kind of husband who really tried, you know. He did the dishes, and you know, sometimes I feel like people think that is the greatest battle. If you just get your husband to do the dishes, you know, or run the vacuum, you've got it licked. But I still felt that I was taking care of, I had the responsibility for 5 people.
Well, all right. Look,
You undertook a responsibility. I don't mean that once you've undertaken a responsibility, you can't get out from under it, but you undertook a responsibility for yourself, for Don, and for 3 kids. You're a grown person.
And what you're really saying is that I left that responsibility.
Didn't you?
No, I don't see it that way, because I think that I still fulfill a commitment or a responsibility to everyone. Now, I'm not being a wife anymore. I'm really not even what you'd call a traditional mother.
Meantime, the kids, let's say, who are strewn in your path are the ones who suffer.
Oh, you really think that? I don't. Or are you just
Well,
being the devil's advocate?
To a certain extent, I'm being a devil's advocate, sure.
I think that the children would have suffered if we had stayed together.
Patrick, do you miss living with your mother?
Yeah.
You do?
I think it is difficult for the children, and but it's one which I think it's the best one worked out. It would have been very difficult for her to raise 3 children. It would have been extremely difficult for me to raise 3 children.
You see the boys 2 days out of the week, and you see Susan every day, obviously.
Well, yes and no.
But, no, I mean, she's your responsibility,
right.
And you have chores around this house.
And what's the difference?
No, that's way too much. Grate about half of that, and then let's see how much there is. And then what you have to make the base first.
When
Let's
we
go
have
ahead.
company, I don't have to apologize if the house isn't spick and span. And frankly, no one expects me to. Before, there was always that kind of feeling underneath that, you know, I should be serving the guests, I should be doing, you know, something, be responsible for their welfare, and as well as for my family. In other words, I felt weighed down with all of the roles that I had to play as a wife.
What would you think of a fella, a husband, took off, left his kids, left his wife? What do you think of a man who does that?
Well, you know, I'd like to think that intellectually I could understand part of it. But I think that it's very difficult to understand a person who just totally walks out on the whole thing. You know, who makes no effort to work through problems with the family, the wife and the children.
Unlike Wanda, more and more women are just running away, disappearing completely into cities across America. And their startled husbands are turning to private detective agencies like Tracer's Company for help. A decade ago, says Tracer's president Ed Goldfader, virtually all the runaways he looked for were husbands. Today, he says, it's all even. 1 runaway wife for every runaway husband.
Has women's liberation contributed mightily to this whole phenomenon of the runaway, the dropout wife?
There's no question in my mind that it has. Not necessarily just the movement itself, but the exposure that the movement has had to the public. What it really has done, it has given the woman who has been smoldering with some discontent and not really being able to identify it and certainly not knowing what to do about it, a direction that she has never had before.
You think that there are a lot of women who feel the way you did and would like to do what you've done?
Yes, I know that. I know that. I would say that there must be, for every one of us who does it, there must be, you know, 50 or 75 or 100 that would like to do it.